Greetings. I'm Dr. Robert Woods of Kepler Education. Welcome to this first course in the series related to the certification program of classical Christian education. In this first course and this first lecture dedicated to the great books and classical Christian education, we'll be exploring the wonderful connection between classical Christ-centered learning and using and thinking through the great books or the masterpieces of Western civilization. When we think about what this course is attempting to do, we want to expose you to not only the content of a liberal arts way of thinking about things or a classical way of thinking about things. We want to introduce you to the meaning of classical Christian education and the relationship between what that has been historically and the great books or liberal arts education. One of my favorite books, and I'll reference this in just a little bit when we conclude with some important books for you to consider reading in the next few years, is Marion Montgomery's The Truth of Things, Liberal Arts and the Recovery of Reality. We're going to propose in this course and in this certification track that liberal arts education is not just about particular disciplines or academic courses or books that you might read. It is a way of looking at the world. It is a way of thinking about the truth of things. We're also going to encourage you to think Christianly about the liberal arts as we make our way through this certification program together. Key items I want you to consider and keep in mind, and you may want to actually make some outline notes and begin with these particular points that you will be encouraged to track throughout the courses, the certification program, and the various readings that we do together and the things that we discuss as a class. The intellectual and historical tradition of what is called classical Christ-centered education. It's been noted by many people through the years that classical education really was the kind of education that our parents and our great-grandparents and our grandparents received. It's the kind of education that the founding fathers received. It was the kind of education that was standard and normative until after the Enlightenment and the effects of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution on education, especially in America. But there are those who would argue that you could receive a classical education in the public school until about the 1940s and 50s. And after that time, there was the new progressive element of education that took education in a very different direction, but it was not in a classically rooted form. We're going to also demonstrate that classical Christian education is about the content of the learning, what is learned, the content of the material, but also about the formation of a particular type of soul. We're looking at classical Christ-centered education when it is done well. We're going to affirm and we're going to assert as with those who have been doing this for centuries, that we're ultimately trying to form a particular kind of person, a particular kind of soul that is oriented toward God and toward the truth of things, that is a lover of the true, the good, and the beautiful. So it's a formation of that kind of person, not just a providing of information. And finally, a genuine liberal arts education is the kind of education that will not only allow you to think well and wisely at this moment, but will provide the kinds of thoughts that will govern you and guide you through the rest of your life. There's some questions that you are going to be encouraged to answer, whether it be in the threaded discussion or in the live class sessions related to this lecture material. We're going to be asking you to respond to what is the nature of the best liberal arts education. We're going to ask you to think through and provide a response to What is the relationship between paideia, what that word means and its richness and its roots as a Greek word and a Greek truth, the liberal arts, artes liberalis, and then the studia humanitatis, or what is now become in the modern world, the humanities. We will be clear to distinguish between the heritage and the history of paideia, liberal arts, and humanities from the past, contrasted and compared to the moment, because the term liberal arts and humanities means something very different today than it meant even 50 years ago, and certainly different from what it meant hundreds of years ago. And finally, we want you to think through, why do the liberal arts matter to education today? I'm confident that if you have even paid attention to a superficial debate about the liberal arts in the modern K-12 education or liberal arts in the modern university, I think you will see that we are in trouble when it comes to how the liberal arts are faring in the modern world. I will argue, though, with a great bit of hope and encouragement, that the liberal arts are alive and well within classical Christ-centered education and in a number of great books program throughout the country. I want to give you a few key quotes to think through about what the liberal arts are as an academic, not only discipline, but as what the liberal arts are as formation of character. James Shaw, an individual that I am deeply indebted to, a great essayist, passed away not terribly long ago, but Father Shaw, Dr. Shaw, wrote a number of essays about the humanities, about liberal arts education, wrote a number of books about liberal arts education. And this is one of his many key quotes to help guide us in our thinking about what it is that liberal arts education is and how we are to think about the liberal arts. What is known as modern thought is largely the attempt to solve the classical human questions without recourse to either tradition. Any adequate concept of liberal arts and liberal education would, to be intellectually complete and honest, have to attend to the Greek and Roman classical traditions, to the Hebrew and Christian revelation, to the patristic and medieval experience, and finally, to modern claims, especially those arising from science and politics, even when they claim to be autonomous. I think what Dr. Shaw is trying to tell us here about the liberal arts is that this is a tradition that is a part of the warp and the woof. It has worked itself into the very fabric of Western culture, of the Western intellectual tradition. It's why there are some today who are trying to completely discard or dispose of the tradition that we're making reference to here. But as you can see, what Dr. Shaw is saying is they're so intricately connected, the liberal arts and the Christian faith, the liberal arts and the Greek and Roman tradition, the liberal arts and the early church fathers and the way in which they thought about the liberal arts as Christians within the early first few centuries of Christianity. It's a part of our heritage as followers of Christ, and it's a part of our heritage in the West. Another great quote from another great author who has a lot to say about the great books in the liberal arts. It's from Peter Kraft. As arms, legs, hands, hearts, brains, lungs, and all the other body parts make a single human body, and as the plot, character, setting, theme, and style make up a single story, all these subjects in the curriculum make up a single thing in education, in educare, a leading out and leading up into the light. It is a change, like an operation or a birth, a change in the student. It is a change from darkness to light, from small mind to large mind. That is from ignorance to knowledge, and much more important, from folly to wisdom. Here, Professor Crave reminds us that the liberal arts education, when it is done right, moves students from foolishness to wisdom and their understanding of things. And that's why it's much more than just factual information or factual data. Another quote from the book that I mentioned at the very beginning, Marion Montgomery's The Truth of Things. This quote here, I think, gets at the heart and soul of what a liberal arts education can do to the soul of the student. Here's what he says. What must be said and insisted upon as the end of all our endeavor to promote liberal education, ultimate earthly end of liberal arts training, must always be to prepare a particular man to hear, really hear Oedipus's agonized cry so well that he knows agony as never before. This gets at the very heart and soul of what I was saying a moment ago about how a liberal arts education is ultimately about formation. As a student reads through and thinks through and dwells within these great books of literature, philosophy, history, political philosophy, social sciences, math, science, as students are exposed to these masterpieces and are encouraged to think along with and think through these great works that I just referenced. As a student does this, the student takes on a different disposition toward truth and wisdom and understanding. And I think Dr. Montgomery hit the nail squarely on the head when he says, when one encounters or engages Greek tragedy, and you can walk away from that reading or that experience, that interaction with that masterpiece, and you feel and understand and sense on a deeper, humane level what's going on within that masterpiece, then you are moving toward the kind of person you should become. A quote from the great American conservative Russell Kirk, who also had a number of important essays on education, specifically liberal arts education. Here's what Dr. Kirk says. When I say that we experience an increased need for truly liberal learning, I am recommending something to leaven the lump of modern civilization, something that would give us a tolerable number of people in many walks of life who would possess some share of right reason and moral imagination, who would not shout the price of everything, but who would know the value of something, who would be schooled in wisdom and virtue. This is a rich quote, and this is packed with so many insights. But here you're getting another insight into what a liberal arts education does to the student who is open to this kind of instruction. It involves wisdom, it involves virtue, it involves the ability to properly assess and properly understand the value of what is. And a quote here from Mortimer Adler, an individual that you will become very familiar with in this certification program. The direct product of liberal education is a good mind, well disciplined in its process of inquiring and judging, knowing and understanding, and well furnished with knowledge, well cultivated by ideas. So this is a quote that gets at the truth that a liberal arts education, when done well, provides the student with not only information and knowledge, but provides the student with understanding. In addition to understanding, it provides the students with, as we say in the modern world, a skill set of reading and writing, of thinking, of listening, and of speaking. And we could add other verbs here of reasoning, of calculating, of discerning. All of these get at the kinds of skills that occur and that are developed with a liberal arts education. And the final quote before we get to our large quote to think through tonight is the classical liberal arts, according to Stratford Caldecott, the classical liberal arts tradition of the West, once offered a form of humane education that sought the integration of faith and reason, and that combined the arts and sciences before these things became separated, fragmented, and trivialized. And I believe that instructor Caldecott is saying it was faith and reason and the sciences and the liberal arts that became separated, fragmented, and trivialized. The traditional liberal arts does not recognize a distinction between faith and reason, and between the hard sciences and the soft sciences, between the social sciences and between philosophy. Traditional liberal arts sees them as thoroughly integrated and connected together. And we'll explore how and why they're connected together. This final quote here that I want to say just a little bit about, it has become my favorite quote when I try to explain to people the true value, the great good that can come from a well-taught and a well-learned liberal arts education. There was an interview between the TV columnist Charlie Rose and Professor Jacques Barzoon, who is himself a great example of liberal arts education. Well, Dr. Barzoon was asked toward the end of the interview how he would explain the value of a liberal arts education, what it is and what it does. And here's what Barzoon said: properly taught and learned, acquired, a liberal education awakens and keeps alive the imagination. By the imagination, I don't mean fanciful things, but I mean the capacity to see beyond the end of your nose and beyond the object in front of you. That is, to see its implications, its origins, and its potential, its danger, and its charm. All the things that enable one to navigate in this difficult and complex world with a modicum of wisdom, with calm, not be alarmed with every little thing that happens, and with resources that in moments of stress and after retirement, in illness and loneliness, keep one's soul and body alive. I will say, over all the years of studying the liberal arts, I have never seen in any course syllabus, or I've never seen in any university catalog, a description of the liberal arts that is as beautiful and as truthful as what Jacques Barzoon said in answering Charlie Rose's question. I would encourage you to spend a little bit of time looking at this quote, pausing the lecture here at this moment, and parsing apart what Dr. Barzoon says. Because I believe in this particular quote, he offers tremendous, rich insight into not only the way that the liberal arts can affect you as a student, but the way that liberal thinking and liberal instruction in this academic sense can positively affect you through the rest of your life. I want to conclude by encouraging you at some point to start building your library and adding to your personal library some of these books. James Shaw's little book, Student's Guide to Liberal Learning, is a quick, easy read, but it is a feast for the soul. As I've mentioned a couple of times, if there is a single book that encouraged me and inspired me to think Christianly about the liberal arts and to exalt the liberal arts as a way of thinking about things and as a way of seeing the world and navigating the world, it would be Marianne Montgomery's The Truth of Things, Liberal Arts, and the Recovery of Reality, which is that last phrase, the truth of things, and the idea of recovering reality or engaging reality is from Thomas Aquinas. I would argue of the top 10 most important books written ever on the history or philosophy of a classical Christian education rooted in liberal arts and within the great books, it would be David Hicks' Norms and Nobility. It is a thick read. It's an expensive book, but it is a treasure. It is well worth having. It is well worth reading over and over and over. Mortimer Adler and Robert Hutchins wrote a fascinating book. It's called The Great Conversation, A Reader's Guide to the Great Books of the Western World. It is a wonderful book with a number of essays that kind of encourage the student regarding the value of the liberal arts and the way in which to engage the great books for a liberal arts education. And finally, in the revised edition, the original edition is spectacular, and the revised edition just added to the greatness of the original. But it's Kevin Clark and Ravi Scott James, The Liberal Arts Tradition, a philosophy of classical Christian education. It is the single best volume that deals with the history and philosophy of thinking Christianly about the liberal arts. I cannot recommend it enough. It is a book that we will be using in this certification program and in the other certification tracks offered by Kepler Education. I am really excited about this course, about our time together. If you have any questions or you need anything at all, please email me, reach out to me through the Kepler email, and we'll certainly get back with you. I'm looking forward to both your participation in the threaded conversation and our live class session, where we will discuss a number of the issues and ideas that came forth in this lecture. Lord be with you as you study these things.